Hello and welcome to Viewers on News. In today's program, we are going to take a stock of the situation as it is developing in the Middle Eastern region, vis-a-vis the situation and the sudden escalation of tensions in the Syria's civil war. Also, the United Nations has expressed alarm at the sudden escalation in Syria's civil war and warned that the situation is extremely fluid and dangerous. Now, more than 500,000 people have been killed since this civil war erupted back in 2011. The United Nations says half of 22 million population of Syria, that was the population before the start of this particular civil war back in 2011. They are displaced and 2 million people are still living in camps. The civil war was largely static since 2020 when a ceasefire that was broken by both Turkey and Russia. Now, multiple media reports suggest that rebels in Syria have launched a major offensive against the government forces, capturing one of the major cities, that is Aleppo. And the Syrian state-run Sana news agency and Syrian Observatory for Human Rights have reported intense fighting near another city, that is Hama. Also, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has vowed to defend the country's stability and territorial integrity. Likewise, we have seen the US, the UK, France and Germany jointly in a statement have urged for de-escalation of the situation by all the parties, calling for a Syrian-led political solution to the conflict. We have also seen a statement coming from Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesperson during the weekly press briefing, saying Pakistan is deeply concerned at the latest developments, calling for international efforts to de-escalate the situation for upholding unity, sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Syria. Let me quickly bring in our esteemed panel of guests to talk about this particular developing situation, especially in the context of the volatility already there in the Middle East, as far as the situation in Gaza, as well as the situation in southern Lebanon is concerned. We are honored to be joined in the studio by Mr. Air Commodore retired Basit Abbasi, senior analyst. Mr. Abbasi, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Manzoor Afridi, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Afridi, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. G.R Baloch. He's a former ambassador. Mr. Baloch, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Abbasi, let me begin the discussion with you. Let's talk about this particular Security Council resolution back in 2015 regarding the situation in Syria since the civil war erupted back in 2011. This resolution number 2254 talks of the concern that it has expressed at the continued suffering of the Syrian people, the dire and the deteriorating humanitarian situation and the ongoing conflict and its persistent and brutal violence. Now, since the eruption of this particular civil war back in 2011, how the people in Syria have suffered. We have seen the stats from the United Nations also. There's been a huge displacement, also triggering one of the biggest refugee crises in the world.
You very rightly covered the main salient features of that human suffering. That out of a population of 22 million, half of them are displaced, and about 6 lakhs have moved out. They are external refugees, and 6 lakhs are internally displaced people. So that's a very, very colossal amount. Of more than half the population is suffering, and the deaths is more than 6 lakhs so far. Out of that, about 3 lakhs are civilians, and same number of fighting people. So this is indeed a very, very serious crisis, and it started in 2011 along with the Arab Spring. There was a movement for popular uprising to sort of depose the ruling government of Mr. Bashar al-Assad, and it was very popular uprising, but the uprising was very brutally suppressed through use of brutal means and support from Russia and Iran. The Russians bombed the uprising areas, and gradually, not gradually, over 3-4 years, the sort of situation was brought under control to some extent. The areas were marked. About 63% of it is governed by the Syrian government forces. About 24% is governed in the north of Iraq that is the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces are covering that, controlling that, and about 13% is with other forces, in which the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is very active. Muhammad Julani is the one who is actually leading the assault at the moment, and the city, the second major city of Aleppo has been captured, and now the moment is from north to south towards Hama and Hom, because they are very important cities. So this is the situation at the moment, and as far as the major players in the area, because the last peace which was brokered, due to which the actually hostilities ended into 2020, was by the Turkey, Russia and Iran. So that was enduring, and that has now been disturbed. So the only way to, the plausible only way to sort of change the situation is for the present regime, the government, the Bashar al-Assad government, to sort of take care of the humanitarian crisis there and be sort of more democratic in their approach. So that maybe through dialogues and through sort of accommodating each other, the situation can be controlled.
There is a mention of what could be the plausible solution in that particular resolution that I've already mentioned. I'll come back to you to have your understanding regarding that. Also, one of the key provisions of that United Nations Security Council resolution. Dr. Manzoor Afridi, what's your understanding? What could be the possible motivation, as we know for a fact that there is volatility in the Middle East already because of the brutality on the part of Israeli regime against the innocent people in Gaza. Also, its escalation towards Lebanon. We see a fragile ceasefire that has been agreed upon between the Israeli regime and the resistance group Hezbollah. Given the ground reality over there, the rebels launching a fresh offensive after that static ceasefire that was holding since 2020 that was brokered by Turkey and Russia. What could be the possible motivation on the part of the rebels at this point in time? And do you think from here onwards there could be a threat of this particular escalation spiraling a little out of control, going wider into the region?
Very much important question, pertinent to the current situation in Middle East and particularly in Syria. So it's more than 14 years that this insurgency and violence that's going on in Syria. And now it's very much, we are astonished, the whole world is astonished that since 2016, it is for the first time that Russia came again in Syria and did bombardment, right, in favor of the Syrian government. You are very much right that since 2018, we have since there was increase in the civil war. So we have seen now this incident, this attack, and a kind of control by the militant group and by the guerrilla forces who are fighting against the Israeli government. So this is it is a new development in the Syrian political and security history. And then in 2020, when there was an agreement brokered with the help of Russia and Turkey, so I think it was after that it was hoped that the Syrian government would be able to have control, especially on the areas bordered with Turkey. But later on, it was proved that with the passage of time, this control became weaker and weaker. And now the militants, they got an opportunity.
But what makes you say that that particular control became weaker and weaker? Because according to United States Institute of Peace, there's 70% territory still controlled by the Syrian government.
I'm not talking about all of the Syria and the entire Syria, but the border area along the Turkey, right? So that was a kind of no control of the government or very much weak control. So that was the reason that the militants, they were very much activated and they were motivated to launch this attack.
What now? Why now? Why now? Do you think this particular recent escalation on the part of the rebels or the militant groups that you've just mentioned could be because of the already volatility that is prevalent over there in the Middle East as far as the situation in Gaza and in Lebanon is concerned?
Yeah, I'm coming to the point. Another one exactly is the same what you stated. The already escalation going on in Middle East, especially of this the Gaza situation, and particularly the Lebanon and Israel, the ongoing situation. Although there is also a ceasefire since for the last 1 week or so. So that is also a kind of motivation, we can say. Another factor which is important, that is also Syria. So the that is Russia. In Russian-Ukraine war, there is now so much damage to Russia, and the militants they are might of the view that Russia is engaged now very much over there. So that's why there would be an opportunity to attack on the Syrian forces and control those areas who are under the government control, right? So these are the things. Another thing, that humanitarian crises are also there. About half of the population that is lacking the basic human and basic living necessities, right? And about 6 million people, they have left Syria, and now they are living in Turkey and Lebanon and Jordan, and about 2 million people, they are homeless and they are living in tents, right, in this winter. So this is the reason that even they have a kind of sympathy from the public, from the people.
So when 2 million people are already living in camps with the least amenities or almost none of the amenities available to them, and with this particular newer escalation, do you think there is going to be more influx of the people towards those camps and which are already stuffed up?
Yeah, no doubt that there would be. Even only in Turkey, almost 500,000 of the people, they are living in Turkey, right? So according to various reports, there will be more increase, the graph that will be increased of the homeless people and who are living in the camps, and maybe some people, if they have chance, they can leave their country's area, they can move to other countries. So this is humanitarian crisis, no doubt, and even people, they are also now almost hopeless from the international community, that even they are not providing the basic necessities to them.
So
they were added some
what
years
happens
back.
to be the role of the responsibility that ideally should be there when we see such a human suffering of such a scale and proportion? What should be the international community as well as the international organizations, and particularly when we talk about the United Nations and its subsidiary agencies should be doing at this particular point in time? I'll come back to you. Let me bring in Mr. G.R Baloch into the discussion also. Mr. Baloch, now these stats, this population that was at the start of this particular civil war, 22 million, half of that is displaced, and 2 million people are still living in the camps, and 6 million people have left the country. 5 million refugees are in Turkey. I just want to have your understanding, when such a refugee crisis is triggered, what sort of pressures the neighboring countries in particular have to face and endure?
Yeah, I think there are several aspects of this crisis, but I think the question that you posed, in my view, is at the top of that. That is a humanitarian aspect of this crisis. In fact, this adds to yet another bloody chapter into the humanitarian crisis, more than crisis actually. The crisis does not encompass really the kind of atrocity, the kind of bloodshed, starvation, homelessness, lack of education, lack of health, which started in Raza, came into Lebanon, and unfortunately again has been revisited by the unfortunate people of Syria. Syria, as we know, is one of those countries which are being termed as the part of the axis of resistance. That is Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and of course this operation by the HTS seems to be motivated by other regional and perhaps global global powers. So it's very kind of shocking to hear that even there are certain linkages to what is happening in Ukraine. They have been, in fact, Syrian army has reported, and in fact, the international media that this time around, these so-called factions have even drones that they have used against the government troops. Where did those drones come from? So I think it's a kind of a macrocosm of the complex crisis that the globe today faces, and I think Syria seems to be, after Raza and Lebanon, a playground for those forces. It's so unfortunate to see that there are like 900 forces, troops of the U.S. troops on the Syrian territory without the approval or without the consent of the so-called free or sovereign country. Then, of course, you have the Turkey, you have Russia having two bases, one in Tartus. It's a very important naval base which gives Russia actually an opening into Mediterranean. So so what is happening actually is that by encircling Tartus, which is not too far now from the line of fire of these fighters, it could become untenable for Russia to hold it. If the upsurge continues and the offensive moves forward. So possible that there is a linkage with what is happening in Ukraine, very much. Of course, Russia also has a air base in Latakia. And also Hezbollah was using Syria as a supply route as well as a camp for training camp. So perhaps there would be some parties interested to, they already have weakened or totally kind of decimated the leadership of Hezbollah, killed so many of their fighters in the pager, that electronic terrorism that we call. So it seems to be now that you see these strains going to what is happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, and what is happening, the tug of war between Russia and the NATO countries. So it's very unfortunate that the ultimate suffering that we see is of the Syrian people whose plight has been described by our speakers before, that more than half the population is refugee or displaced, and there seem to be no hope because nobody is coming up to propose some kind of a reconciliation among these warring factions. I think here is the time that the Secretary General should call for a immediate ceasefire and maybe call upon all the warring factions to follow UN Resolution 2254, where it was decided that there will be a transition government, inclusive transition government. That's the only way forward. Otherwise, we'll see this fratricidal war go on for another 10 years. So I think here's the time that the OIC, the Arab League, and all other people, all other countries which want to see a stable world, which wants to see an end to the sufferings of the people of Middle East, this bloodshed, this starvation, lack of all the humanitarian needs that need to be given to them. So I think here's the time that the world really have to, all those sane voices of the world have to raise their voice against this resurgence of extremist offensive there, because it can really further degenerate into yet another Al-Qaeda era where the world might be threatened by terrorism once more. So I think there's a lot of risk, not only for obviously huge cost by the Syrians, but there's a big cost for the regional countries as well as for the world at large. Yeah, Jawad.
Right. Mr. Baloch, you have mentioned rightly a very important point, that particular provision, that very important clause there in that resolution back in 2015, 2254 of the United Nations Security Council resolution. The kind of language that we have seen in that very provision is very much similar to this very language. The US, the UK, France and Germany in their joint statement have talked about regarding a Syrian-led political solution to this particular crisis. But before heading into that particular detailed analysis from you and other participants in the show, I would like you to shed a little bit of light regarding as to what sort of pressures the neighboring countries in particular feel, or what kind of burden is shifted on their shoulders when such a refugee crisis is triggered of such a proportion.
Definitely, we have a first-hand experience of Afghan refugees. We had about over 3 million refugees. In fact, just to correct the earlier figures, what I was looking at it, probably Turkey hosts over 2 million refugees. Lebanon has 500,000 refugees. Jordan has another about 600,000 refugees from Syria. And I think those who have left Syria for good to Germany, I think is another about 2 million refugees. So definitely, when refugees influx comes into the neighboring countries, there is a pressure. There's a demographic pressure. There's an environmental pressure. There's a pressure to meet their immediate needs, that is their shelter and food. So I think definitely Turkey would be feeling strain. They would be, in fact, what is not talked about is the internally displaced people. Those areas, because now it's a kind of urban warfare. At least they have chosen to go for that they are taking the city centers. Aleppo, Hama has been I think it has fallen into the hands of the fighters. And the Syrian, this is what I was looking at the international media, the Syrian troops have withdrawn. So there is a huge, I think, tragedy may not, I hope so, I pray that another the situation may not aggravate for the whatever small little civil life had returned to these areas, because they, after 2015 there was, or 2016 in fact, pushing of these fighters back and controlling and getting back the control by the Syrian government forces. They seem to have really taken it not that seriously, and this was kind of a surprise attack. And as the reports now filter down, that it was very well planned and very well rehearsed. And these fighters had a lot of external support as well.
For the interjection over here, let me move towards once again towards Air Commodore Abbasi Saab. Mr. Abbasi, now before heading towards that particular, I think that you were already discussing in your earlier take regarding as to what could be the plausible solution to this long-term conflict. Now, I just want you to shed a little bit of light regarding as to what pressures and burdens the neighboring countries in particular feel. Mr. G.R Baloch is of the view in terms of demographic pressures, the environmental pressures. What is your understanding regarding that?
Refugees in any country become a burden on the resources of that country. And all the surrounding countries are not rich countries. They have their own problems. And like Iraq, Jordan, Turkey is better off, but still they already have a very large population, about 5 million or so they are hosting them. And this was as a result of their agreement with the European Union, because most of these refugees were heading towards Europe. So to block that, the European Union prevailed upon Turkey to sort of accommodate these refugees. So that is the pressure, because it puts pressure on their educational resources, on your shelters, on their food resources, and all sorts of civil amenities. And you earlier asked a question, so these are the kind of pressures that they feel. And the whole area is already under a conflict, a huge conflict, which has already sort of spiraling into various areas. It spiraled into Lebanon, and now it's here, and There have been skirmishes with Iran and all that. So it's actually gradually it's fanning out. So these are very dangerous developments, both globally and for the local populace. So the international committee has a sort of responsibility to find a solution to it.
When we talk about the major powers, the US, the UK, France and Germany, there we issued a joint statement urging for the de-escalation by all the parties. They've called for a Syrian-led political solution to the conflict,
Yes.
the plausible solution that you were already referring to. Now, this is almost similar language in that resolution 2254 of the United Nations Security Council. That let me bring in that very clause of it, reiterating that the only sustainable solution to the current crisis in Syria is through an inclusive and Syrian-led political process.
That's right. Actually,
Now, by looking at this joint statement of these major
Certainly.
powers, what do you think would be the intention behind this?
I understand. Actually, if this is to be implemented, we have to see what are the hurdles. That's very altruistic. What the language is altruistic. Yes, this is the solution. But you look at the ethnic divide, look at the sectarian divide, and so many sort of differences. Even the same-sex people have so many different groups. So this is a very, very sort of confusing situation for any diplomat to sort of come out with a solution. I think if you see actually any solution, a workable solution has to be sort of in unison with the ground realities. What are the ground realities? The Syrian government controls only 60% of Syria. 25% is the Kurds and about 20% rest, in which the major initiative have been taken by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, this Mr. Durrani's group. So any solution, all these four parties have to sit down and sort of accommodate each other. And I think in this process, the biggest hurdle is Mr. Bashar al-Assad himself, because he is not ready to compromise. And he would have been succumbed to the actual existing pressures which were too much for him, except for the help and support from the Russians and the Iranians. Now those forces have slightly sort of weakened, you can say, because their sort of focus is in another direction. Russia is more focused on to Ukraine. Iran has already suffered. The Hezbollah has been on the back foot, and they were the major supporter who would actually participate and stoke the sort of falling regime of Mr. Bashar al-Assad. So unless some pressure is exerted on Bashar al-Assad, both from the internally there is a lot of pressure, because all these movements, as the Ambassador Saab just pointed out, that this north to south movement of Hayat al-Sham, the Hom and Hamas capture, is actually threatening the only about 100-kilometer long strip with the Mediterranean Ocean, so Mediterranean Sea. So if that portion is captured by these people, these rebels or whatever you call them, some people would call them freedom fighters also, because they are fighting for their own rights. So then the link with the sea would be blocked. It would become a landlocked country itself, like so many other countries of that region. So I think to avoid that situation, the world powers must exert their influence, not in words only, but in real terms. And we have seen that when they mean business, changes do take place. But presently it seems that the major player, Russia, is unchallenged. But the other countries, your Western countries, are not ready to sort of come in that way forcefully behind the solution.
Right, you already talked about what could be the major obstacle, and it is incumbent upon the major powers in the world in order to exert that very pressure, in order to de-escalate the situation. There are multiple media reports on one side. We have also seen President Bashar al-Assad, now he has vowed to protect the stability and the territorial integrity of Syria. He has also accused the Western powers of trying to redraw the map over there in the region. We also know for a fact there is a principle that this particular resolution of the United Nations Security Council talks about, the principle of the sovereignty, independence and unity and the territorial integrity. So when there is a legitimate government over there, so they have the right to defend itself against whatever the forces, whether they call themselves freedom fighters or not.
So this is we have to interpret the words. Now, when Bashar al-Assad said that he wants to safeguard the country, that means he wants to keep fighting against the people who are fighting now and sort of gaining grounds. So, if the fighting has to stop, these people who are actually a major portion of their population, area wise he controls 60%, but the major portion is not supporting him. Half of it has moved out of those areas. So, if all the populace has to be taken into account, and their a government of their aspiration is formed, if not formed, actually I don't mind if Bashar al-Assad is head of the state, but the government is inclusive, because all these forces who are actually controlling so much of area and governing it very well. Idlib has been governed very well.
And by inclusivity, you mean to say, if I am correctly getting it, because this particular word is used in that clause of that particular UNSC resolution also, inclusive means those people who are represented by Bashar al-Assad also, right?
That's right, but it doesn't have to be necessarily he himself,
right?
Because anybody from that faction.
I got your point. I got your point, Dr. Afridi. This plausible solution as per this United Nations Security Council resolution, and now there is an urgency that has been called by the US, the UK, France and Germany, a Syrian-led political solution to this conflict.
Well, possible, but I think if all the warring factions, if the Syrian government, Bashar al-Assad, if they are ready, we have example for the 26th November, right? That when Lebanon was ready, Israel was ready, and even Hezbollah, that was also was taken into confidence by the Lebanese government. Then it took place, and mainly because of the mediation and efforts of the United States, but it was also sponsored by and backed by Germany, UK and France. Now what you are telling the names of these 4 countries. So again, these countries, they can play a very important role. It is very much possible if the Syrian government is ready for talks, for negotiations, one thing. Another, if really international powers, they want to have a solution, because Russia, that is on one side, United States and its friends, its allies, they are on the other side, regional powers, regional countries of Syria within the Middle East, they are also divided as far as the violence and this situation in Syria is concerned. So those all must be on the same page. Another thing, the transitional government, right, for the time being, any kind of formula that can be implemented with the consent and with the help of all the factions, all the stakeholders within this area in this conflict. And the 4th thing, that is the all-inclusive government, right, for stability, for peace, for tranquility, and for a longer term political stability and peace within this area. Then it's possible. Then they can have their own formula, their own working for future setup, that what kind of setup they want. For example, Kurds, that is one faction. Another forces, those are backed by the United States. Forces, especially the government forces, Bashar al-Assad government, that is backed by Russia, right? So there are 3 kinds of division within Syria. After having a consensus, a kind of agreement, it's at least for the time being, to have negotiations and to reach to a more wider, solution for it. So even some autonomy that can be provided. So for those people like Kurds who really want their own homeland. So if for the timing it's not possible to have their own separate homeland, at least more autonomy it can be given to them. I mean, it is just an example. Any kind of formula that is possible, but at least if all the factions and the Syrian government, they are on the same page. And second, if there is really a mounting pressure from the international community and big powers on all these Syrian conflict stakeholders to force them for negotiations, for settlement.
Right, Mr. G.R Baloch, now that particular provision over there in the UNSC resolution, also this particular joint statement on the part of the US, the UK, Germany and France. Let's specifically talk about this particular statement by Pakistan's Foreign Office also during today's press briefing. Let me quote that Pakistan is deeply concerned at the latest developments in Syria. We believe that the ongoing situation will further destabilize the region and embolden terrorist organizations. It is critical to promote peace and security in Syria for regional stability. We call for international efforts to de-escalate the situation and for upholding unity, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Unquote. The first very point of that UNSC resolution 2254 that you were already referring to also talks about the reaffirmation of the strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic and to its purposes and the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Keeping in view all these aspects, what could be the most plausible solution as per your understanding?
First of all, let me just give a little background to the fault lines that the Syrian society is faced with. I had the good fortune of seeing Syria in 90s. I was as a diplomat and I served there for 5.5 years. So I have seen them very from close, observed it, reported upon it. And even that time also we saw that there were huge and deep fault lines among the society of Syria, despite their apparent a good quality of life and apparent stability that was during the time of Bashar al-Assad's father, President Hafiz al-Assad. But we could see even that time that if given other forces, internal or external, they could really fall into this kind of a factional fighting or a internecine fratricidal war that we see today. That is one comment. Now coming on to the solutions. I think, as I said earlier, unfortunately, the Syrian situation coming out of that so-called Arab Spring or Arab Autumn, as we all know that it was just not only public resentment against the dictators, but there were other forces behind it which brought in a lot of instability and destruction of several Arab Muslim countries. So I think there was and there is perhaps still a certain global forces, in fact a regional force, I think we should name it. Israel would never like a stable Syria because the only two countries which could really confront Israel's hegemony, regional hegemony, was Iraq and Syria. So that remains their objective, that stability must not return. Now, if that is the reason, and as we know that Israel has its own lobbies, its own influence all around the world, these are very good words by those 4 or 5 Western powers that there should be no escalation. But are they serious in really influencing those forces which are supporting them? So I believe that it seems to me that it may be at this point of time thinking of a peaceful solution immediately would be a wishful thinking. I see, in fact, we should be ready to see more bloodshed, unfortunately.
Of the people over there, Mr. G.R Baloch, when we talk about the rehabilitation, the reconstruction of the war-ravaged, the civil war-ravaged country, and if a plausible solution, the de-escalation remains to be a wishful thinking, what about them? Where that reconstruction or rehabilitation or alleviation of the suffering of the people is going to come from?
First of all, I think let's sort of face the facts. First of all, the extra-regional and regional powers have to decide to withdraw from interfering into the internal fighting in Syria, Will that be possible? Will that be possible? Nonetheless, I think immediately yet another Security Council call should be, and it might be coming across by way of a call or a request or requisition from the OIC or the Arab countries. They must reiterate Resolution 2254, whatever has been said, and perhaps the global powers have to decide. In this, China can play an important role. China has influence on Russia. China has influence in Syria, and China can communicate with the US and other Western powers, at least if not the US. So I think there has to be a global effort. Only then
it has to be a global effort in order to alleviate the suffering of the people over there in Syria. Mr. G.R Baloch, former ambassador, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on this show tonight. Really appreciate that. Air Commodore retired Basit Raza Abbasi, senior analyst. Thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Manzoor Afridi, foreign affairs expert. Thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.